Welcome, everyone. We know you're logging in right now, so we just wanted to say welcome. I'm Nancy Hall-Behrens, Director of Congregational Life at Westminster. We're so glad that you're joining us today for the presentation in our Broadening Horizons speaker series. Today, we'll let us do a bit of spiritual armchair travel during this limited season of limited traveling. And I'm really looking forward to hearing more about the Camino de Santiago from Amy and Dave. A quick note to say we are blessed to have several other Westminster members who have also walked the Camino and have appreciated hearing from them about their experiences throughout the years. So we recognize that we've had several pilgrims in our midst. After the formal part of today's presentation, there will be a time for questions from the audience. If you could please use the written Q&A feature of your Zoom window to write down your questions that you would like to ask, that would be great. And you can write those at any time. Also, we ask that you please not record or take screenshots of the presentation. Today's program is being recorded, so you will be able to view it later on the Westminster YouTube channel and share with your friends in that way if you wish. So I'd like to open with prayer, and my opening and closing prayers today are borrowed from the weekly pilgrimage done by members or with members and guests of the Iona community in Scotland. That's a pilgrimage I've been on, they're one-day pilgrimages. The prayers seem appropriate for today since our theme of the day is pilgrimage. Let us pray. Bless to us, O God, the earth beneath our feet. Bless to us, O God, the path whereon we go. Bless to us, O God, the people whom we meet. Amen. And now Cindy Smith, the chair of the Congregational Life Committee, will introduce today's speakers. Cindy.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm so pleased to welcome today's speakers, Amy and Doug Donsolar. They'll lead us along the Camino de Santiago in Spain. Amy and Doug have walked and bicycled 3 routes of the Camino beginning in 2013. The Camino de Santiago is also known as the Way of St. James. It is a network of pilgrimages leading to the shrine of the Apostle James. Over 300,000 pilgrims follow these paths each year as a retreat for spiritual growth. Amy and Doug are members of Westminster. Amy is a speech pathologist in Alexandria, and Doug is retired from a career in the Navy and now serves as the Deputy Director of Reactor Refueling at Naval Reactors at the Navy Yard. He is also the chair of the Board of Directors for the American Pilgrims on the Camino. Amy, Dave.
Well, hi, we're glad to come talk to you today a little bit about the Camino. So I'm glad we had the full disclosure in there. I do chair the American Pilgrims on the Camino, so I'll put in a few shameless plugs as we go through the presentation. And we'll just dive right into it. We'll go ahead and share the screen here of our presentation. Let's see here. There we go. And here. So this is our Broadening Horizons. As we go through this discussion, and Amy will jump in anytime she wants to. She heckles me.
Needs to correct him.
She'll heckle me through the presentation, which is a good thing. There'll be 7 lessons sprinkled through here, and so I've used this a few times to see how those lessons shine through. So I'll share with you at the end what those are and what we share amongst the American Pilgrims organization. First, I wanted to at least acknowledge the life in the time of COVID, and this is our 2020 calendar, and we seem to be in that middle blob right there. So Spain, as you know, is in a similar situation. The Camino right now is not open to Americans. We can't travel to the EU at this point. And so, but the Camino is, obviously, it's been there forever. It will be there when we can travel again. Within Spain, there have been a number of changes in the way the Camino is conducted. As we go through the presentation, you'll see we'll point out some of those things that have changed. So if you are looking to go walk the Camino in the future or bike the Camino, you'll know maybe what some of those things are. And so we'll dive right in. The Camino, this is the French way. This is the way that we went. And so we started in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, France, and we walked to Santiago, about 790 kilometers. I don't think we had any particular skills in advance. But we'll get into a little bit about how we stumbled on this. Anything to add there?
I was going to say, longest walk I ever took. So, one foot in front of the other and just keep going. So, yeah.
Now, we mentioned the network of trails at the opening. The French way is the one in yellow there at the top, but there are an infinite number of Caminos across Europe. People historically started at their doorway and walked their way to Santiago. These are some of the more well-established trails in Spain. So everybody goes, why? Why would you walk 790 kilometers? Well, we're not Catholic, obviously, but I watched a movie called The Way, directed by Emilio Estevez, starred Martin Sheen, Emilio Estevez, and several others. It's sort of an independent movie back in, I believe it was the 2011 timeframe. I think we were on a plane, actually, and watched the movie. And at the end of the movie, I said, I gotta go, right? And I showed it to two people, my oldest son and my wife, Amy. And Amy's first response was,
no. There was no discussion. There was no paragraph. There was no explanation why. It was a one-word answer. The answer was no. The idea of walking with my belongings on my back across a country was not something that even began to seem like a remote possibility of, number one, doable, or number two, enjoyable. So yeah, my initial plan was definitely no.
So that's where my oldest son came in, because I didn't want to go alone. So I showed him the movie, and he called me back and predictably said, we have to go. We have to do it. And so I encourage you, if you haven't seen this movie, it's about a gentleman who has a son who he doesn't necessarily agree with, who quits college and decides to go trek across Europe, and actually is killed on the Camino de Santiago. And then this is the story of that. Martin Sheen plays the gentleman who flies to France to identify the body, and then he had the body cremated and then spread the ashes as he walked the Camino de Santiago himself. So very good movie. And this was us, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, when we first started.
So apparently I did change my mind. We will never say ever again that AIM is not flexible.
It was more of an evolution. So AIM started with, hey, I'll meet you at the end. You guys can walk it, and I'll meet you when you get to the end. And that sounded like fun. But then, quite honestly, I caught her in REI looking at backpacks as I left books and things around the house for her to take a look at. And as she read and explored more, she got a little more comfortable and said, okay, I'll do the last 100 kilometers, because if you walk that last 100 kilometers, you can still get the Compostela, the certificate from the cathedral saying that you completed the pilgrimage. And that quickly evolved into, let's just give it a shot. So if any of y'all are thinking about doing it, give it a shot. Now, one thing we heard in advance was the beauty of the Pyrenees. Oh, it's beautiful as you walk across. The scenery is just stunning. I've heard that, but this is what we saw all the way across. So we did not see the Pyrenees except little tiny peaks here and there. But I hear it's nice. So now, the interesting thing, although we were a little disappointed we didn't get to see the scenery of the Pyrenees, you do find yourself with this setting, right? So where you're walking through the woods with this mist, and you can hear things in the distance, like the cowbells on the cows and the sheep. And so you hear the jingling of bells as you're walking through the countryside. But you find yourself largely alone and just incredibly peaceful. This is what the Pyrenees actually looks like. So if you look on the left, the second from the left is actually my youngest son, who, after he went after us. He did not go with us on the first adventure here. He was a college student who it was sort of doing hot and cold in classes, doing well in some classes, not so well in others, and decided he didn't know what he wanted to do with his life. So he moved to Portland with some friends, and predictably that didn't go very well. He lost a lot of weight. He wasn't looking good. Little depressed, decided starvation wasn't quite the path forward, and wanted to come back home. And I said, sure, of course, but first you have to walk the Camino, because Aim and I had experienced it, and we knew sort of what to expect and what it might do. And so we asked him to go walk it, and we paid for his ticket. He flew to Paris and had to actually make his own way through the French countryside to Saint Jean, where he got his pilgrim credential and started his Camino. These were some friends he picked up from the start, and these were them crossing the Camino or the Pyrenees. And this was actually one of the first times I think we had a picture of him smiling in a long, long time. So we were pretty excited when we started getting these pictures from the Camino. Now, interestingly, I will share with you now, I guess, he didn't finish. He was trying to keep up with his group of friends, his newfound friends over there, and he was walking about 30 kilometers per day. And he called us around Burgos and said, I can't walk anymore. My knees are killing me. And so for perspective, Aim and I walked between 17 and 25 kilometers per day, depending on the day. So he was really cranking those miles out. And we said, well, take a couple of days, slow down a little bit and see how you do. He couldn't go any further. And so he came home. One of the interesting things, even though he wasn't able to finish, which was disappointing for him, was when he came home, he was a different person. He got a job here in Alexandria. He met his future wife. And now he's got a career in the Navy. Both of them are in the Navy, actually, down in Kings Bay, Georgia. Turned his life around by getting out there, relying on himself, meeting new people. Very transformative, I think. And I attribute that to the Camino.
Absolutely.
Any more on that?
No, I was going to say the interesting thing when you're seeing the backpacks and everybody carrying things, and then you see this table of individuals, recognize this is not the Appalachian Trail. We were not sleeping in tents. We were not carrying all of our gear. There's a infrastructure that has been developed along this trail, and so every 5 to 10 kilometers you would have a little tiny shop or a little tiny place that you could eat. And albergues, which is essentially a pilgrim hostel, are designed for the pilgrims as you walk along a trail. Again, now in a COVID world, things will look a little different, but pre-COVID, you would have the opportunity to have this communal meal, and the group of individuals sitting around that table actually, it's not the entire table, but the group ended up being a combination of 17 languages that night. Yep. And it was actually one of our more challenging group dinners. We typically would say yes to them. You never knew quite what you were going to eat, but it was going to be hearty. That was one of the best things about walking all the way across Spain, is you can eat anything. It does not stick anywhere, which is wonderful. Chocolate croissants, highly recommended. But this dinner, we had kind of had an afternoon of quietness, where a lot of times when you would walk into a town, we would typically stop by midday because of the heat of the summer. We had walked in July and early August, so we would get up at dawn to walk, but we would stop by lunchtime. And this afternoon, we'd done our washing our clothes and hanging them up to dry, and taking our wonderful Spanish siesta, which is a nice thing. But really, this group of individuals, there wasn't the informal chit chat that you typically would experience each day. And so we kind of, shrugged our shoulders and said, well, I guess we'll get an early night's sleep. It'll be all right. I'm sure the food will be fine. It's all good. And by the time we finished this 2-hour dinner, we were speaking the word ice cream in 17 different languages, and everyone was having a wonderful time because the languages ended up, this one spoke English and Slovakian, and this one spoke German and Spanish, and so the translations worked their way along, and we all figured it out, and it ended up being a really fun night. So the initial impression of, oh, this is going to be painful, actually turned out to be quite wrong. So
Very good. This was again for my son's journey. You'll notice every meal comes with a bottle of wine, and there's an empty bottle there, but they may or may not have drank that. I'm not really sure. You have to judge for yourself. One of the big questions we always get is how do you find your way across this country, across the countryside? And it is incredibly well marked. You see the sign down on the picture on the left. You see the little pedestal with the symbol of the Camino. The interesting part is in different regions, the direction of the shell there, points the direction of the trail in different ways. Sometimes you have to go to where all the points converge. Sometimes you have to go in the direction where they fan, but you learn that as you go. Part of the fun is when you get off the trail, there's the neighbors around the Camino recognize the wayward person with the backpack and the pilgrim shell, and will send you on your way, on the right way. So what do you bring? That's the other question. That's always the other question that you get. You get a lot of questions about shoes, a lot of questions about backpack. Which one's the best? The answer is, well, it's up to you. But you have to bring less than you think. We saw people like this actually. Looked like a little bit of a junk truck. People walking down the Camino with everything they brought. And I will tell you, AIM had 13 pounds of material in her backpack, and I had 17 pounds of material in mine.
Dave overpacked.
I overpacked. There were still things we didn't use. And so after we walked the Camino, we went back again and walked across the Pyrenees and added 100 kilometers on the back of it a few years later. And then last year we bicycled the Camino from Porto, Portugal on up, and even on that trip we brought one gym-sized duffel bag between the two of us. We'll show you some pictures later. You'll be surprised how little you need. And as a matter of fact, early on the trail, similar to like you think about the Oregon Trail when people were pitching things off of the wagons, along the Camino early on, there are baskets along the way where you can put things you don't need and take things that maybe you forgot. And so, or you can actually find things along the trail. So we'll kind of go through a typical day. And one of the interesting things we learned was you start walking fairly early in the morning. We walked in July and August, two of the hottest months in Spain. And so we tended to get up before the sun, and you didn't need an alarm clock. You'd hear the rustling of the backpacks, and that would wake you up, and you would start on your way. And our motto became 5K before breakfast. And as we were walking, one of the things we learned was, even though you may be looking sort of, at the darkness, you got to remember to turn around and take a look, because there's some of the most stunning views in the morning were of the sun coming up behind you.
So because we walked west, you always had that morning sun, behind, and laughingly, the suntan lines on the back of my ankles and the backs of my arms and the back of my neck faded after a mere 6 months.
So these were some of the views that we had in the morning when you remembered to turn around and take a look. And then of course comes breakfast, and we labeled this one "Got Milk." So you never know who might wander by while you're sitting at these little roadside cafes or trailside cafes. But these were some of the best times. Have a little cafe con leche, and you notice the croissant there. And of course, you're walking enough every day that you can eat pretty much anything you want. So there were some days you'd walk along and you'd see other pilgrims. Other days you'd be more alone in solitude. And I tell you, the mix, I thought, reflecting on it, the mix was important. There were days it was really good to spend with other people, but we certainly appreciated walking alone sometimes. And even Aim and I walk faster than she does, and so there were times where we would walk together, and there were other times, I'd be one of those people up there, and I'd look back every now and again. And
he actually is the one in the trees. That's a lot of my Camino journey was the back of Dave's backpack.
So, and you're walking again. Sometimes you're walking on trails, but other times you're walking along roads. And the interesting part was navigating our way through some cities, Leon and Burgos. We actually got a little lost in Burgos, but we finally found our way when we heard there were some Australians we had met earlier in the journey. And my recommendation for you is, if you have an opportunity to spend some time with the Australians anywhere,
Always.
you should do it. We were walking through Burgos looking for the cathedral, which is enormous, which you wouldn't think you'd have to look for it, but you do. And we heard an expletive from blocks to our left. It was the Australians helping us find our way. This was above Burgos, and that's my oldest son on the right. He ended up he walked to Pamplona, and we stayed there for the running of the bulls, and he was struggling with his feet. He was born with club feet, and he's had multiple surgeries as a child, and so he's always struggled a little bit with that, and his feet were bothering him. And so we rented from a place called Bike Iberia. They delivered the bike to him, and he rode the bike the rest of the way across Spain. So he was able to adapt there. The beautiful landscape. One of the things that really struck us were some of the flowers, so we shared a couple of those here with you. Roadside stands. Like Ames said, there's a big infrastructure across the Camino, and you'll find these things that pop up here and there. And I tell you, those raspberries were pretty good, especially on a hot day as you walk in the afternoon. This was just some beautiful bridges. We walked across the old Roman bridges, some of these types of bridges. In every city, you can see the church in the distance. Every city has some beautiful churches. And this is a typical little town as you wander in. Piece of advice for you: always go to the second bar. And they're called bars, but they have food, snacks. It's more than alcohol.
It's kind of like a KOA campground store as well, because they know what pilgrims need. So they're going to have, sunscreen. They're going to have little tiny tissue packs. They're going to have, it's a well-stocked little micro shopping experience. So that's the other thing to remember, is you're not, in the middle of the wilderness. You are, just one more jaunt away from the next town. And so the fears, when you're packing, you pack a lot of fears in your backpack. Well, what if I get blisters? What if I get this? What if I get bitten? What if I have this? And you start putting extra things in your bag just in case. And that's how you end up with a bag that weighs 25 pounds or 30 pounds.
Right.
And then you end up with feet that can't manage the journey. So it's learning to let go and recognize that it's going to be okay. And there is still some little grandma in some little small town who is telling the story of this crazy woman in English who was trying to, ask questions of laundry soap, because I was trying to figure out, as I was having to purchase a replacement along the way, whether or not I was buying dishwasher soap or laundry soap, because I didn't really think those were interchangeable for my clothes. And then it was whether or not it was for sensitive skin or if it was with bleach. So
we are not fluent in Spanish, and so if you have questions about the language, we tried Rosetta Stone in advance of the journey, and
Dave did really well. He's really good at Rosetta Stone.
And so we were in a little store in a town like this, a little tiny store, and I had some locals behind me, and the cashier said, "Habla español? Do you speak Spanish?" And I said, "Just a little bit, just enough to get by." And she goes, she wanted to see it. And I said, "Oh, just a little." And so even the people behind us in line were, like, "Come on." And so I said, "Rosetta Stone." And she knew that. She knew what that was. And she smiled really big. And she said, "Come on." And I said, "La bicicleta es roja." So the bicycle is red. And she goes, "That's good." And she looked at me like, "More?" And I go, "Nope, that's all I got." And I look back, and the people in line were giggling, so I provided some entertainment there. We'll talk a little bit about the albergues, and this is where there's been some significant changes. You see the pictures on the left and right. Obviously, no social distancing going on there, but this was a big part of the experience, is the community and the pilgrim community that develops. There are times you see all new people. There are times you run into people that you've seen before. One of the best memories I have is walking into the town in the evenings or the late afternoons, and they would yell out your country because they would learn who was from where, and everybody would sort of keep an eye out for each other. And so you'd walk into the town and people would go, America. And what we learned, and what folks picked up on pretty quick, was that Zach was associated with us, and he's big and recognizable. And so as soon as we would walk into town, they would go, Zach's over there.
And apparently he got the same thing where, oh, your parents are over there. So, we had the community keeping an eye on him for us.
One of the things that's different now is as the Camino reopens after this pandemic, is these group style albergues are going a little bit by the wayside in favor of more individual rooms or fewer people per room, more spread out. So there's been some significant changes, and obviously all the same protocols we're using here with masks and things like that for people to interact. Not all the rooms are what you might expect. You got to be a little flexible. This was me standing in the doorway. You had to kind of duck in. It was our sort of a little hobbit room that we were in, but we were thankful to have it. One of the phrases we learned over and over again was, a pilgrim is grateful. This is the credential. And for me, this was one of the more satisfying things of marking your way across Spain, is every place you ate and every place you slept had a stamp, a unique stamp. And you fill this credential with stamps as you complete your journey. And when you get to the end in Santiago, they inspect your credential to validate that you've completed the pilgrimage, and that's how you earn your Compostela. These, if you ever need a credential, the only authorized distributor of credentials in the United States is American Pilgrims, and you can go on the website and we distribute those for free. This is, I think it's called Alto Perdón in Spain, one of the beautiful sculptures along the Camino. This, if you, in the movie, this is featured in there. And as the pilgrims are walking past this feature, somebody bicycles by, and that's when the people walking figure out that you can bike this thing. And this is Cruz de Ferro. When you go on the journey, you're supposed to bring a stone. And again, we didn't know this. We learned this from the movie. But you're supposed to bring a stone, and it's supposed to, when your life is being judged, it's supposed to tip the scales in your favor. And so you're supposed to carry it, and it represents your burdens. And so you're supposed to bring it from home, carry it along the Camino, and then unload your burdens on the Camino in this spot. And as you can see, the hill's built up quite a bit. So over the years, there have been quite a few rocks delivered there.
And they're from all over. It's a really interesting mix of, things that don't naturally occur on that hill.
So this is Aim and I placing our stones. We actually brought ours from Guam. We lived in Guam at the time, or we were transitioning back to move here to Alexandria, and we loaded those there. So with that discussion in mind about tipping the scales in your favor when the deeds of your life are being judged, our oldest son Zach wasn't taking any chances. so he you can see he did not carry that rock all the way from Guam. He, I think he found that there somewhere.
Picked it up in the woods.
And so we mentioned the churches. These are the churches, the cathedrals in Leon on the left and Burgos on the right. Just some beautiful places. And one of the things we tried to do as we walked across is we tried to take extra days. We stopped in Leon for an extra night. We stopped in a variety of places. About once a week, we would take a break and get a more private room and relax a little bit. And this is us as we neared the end of our journey. If you look at that, I think it says 19 kilometers on there. We're about 20 kilometers out of Santiago at this point. We staged this. We really felt better than this, but we thought it was a little fun. So. And then, of course, you get encouragement all along the way. There's signs everywhere, but you just keep walking and you get used to it as time goes by. And then this is the destination. This is the cathedral at Santiago. And you walk into the square, and I think I have a broader picture of the square here. So you walk into this square, and it's filled with pilgrims all arriving at the cathedral. And you can see the cathedral looks a little dark there. It's since been cleaned and refurbished. We went back this last year when we biked the Camino, and it's just stunningly beautiful. You look off to your left there, so the left side of the picture, because this is sort of a panoramic, and that is, that's a hotel now. It's a parador, a hotel, but it used to house pilgrims from the 1400s. And so it's been there for a long time, but it's now like a 5-star hotel. And so as we ended our journey, we were trying to figure out where we were going to stay here. And I walked into the Parador, and keep in mind, I've been walking for 35 days. I'm
same outfit,
tan on one side, faded clothes. I haven't shaved, it looks pretty bad. And I ended up standing in line, and I said, how much for a night? And he handed me a number, and the number was really high. And so I said, 1 night. And he goes, Peregrino? And I looked at myself, and I looked at him, and I went, yes. And I showed him my credential, and he gave me a different price, which was much more reasonable. And I said, 3 nights. And so outside, Aim and Zach were standing there trying to figure out, based on the amount of time I'd been inside, how long we were going to stay. And so we ended up staying in this beautiful Parador immediately adjacent to the square. This is the Portico of Glory, and this is the statue of St. James. Features prominently in the movie. You're not allowed to touch the statue anymore, but pilgrims used to approach the statue on their knees and put their hand at his feet. And there's actually a print or a worn-in print where people used to touch, and they don't allow that anymore. But you can, when you go into the cathedral, do a couple of things. Cathedral's being refurbished right now, but it'll be open next year again for the Holy Year. You can go in and stand in line and walk around behind, on the altar, behind the apostle, the statue of the apostle, and you can put your arms around him and hug the apostle. You can also go down and see the crypts that contain artifacts from St. James. And this is us at the end. We survived. This is us in Santiago. Don't know where that gray beard is coming from, but this was us when we finished our journey. It rained actually the last days we were going in. One of the interesting things that we found is that last 100 kilometers is pretty populated in terms of pilgrims, because that's the minimum distance you have to walk to get to Compostela. And there's a lot of Europeans in August in particular that walk. And so we found when we got to Sarria, which is right about at that 100 kilometer mark, we went from folks that had been making sort of the long haul to a lot more people. And for the first day out of Sarria, I found myself kind of angry. You're just unhappy. All these people were on my trail. And but we were walking along in the rain one day, and it only rained a couple of days on the Camino. And as we were walking along, we got behind a group of, was it Danish?
No, they were from
Netherlands. They were a group of almost, I kind of equate them to scouts, but a lot of friends, and they were walking along and they were singing very gently, and we just ended up smiling at the end of that, because we'd gone from kind of wet and depressed to just lifted our spirits. It was incredible.
And it was so funny. Later on that day, I ended up waiting in line for the restroom behind these girls, because you can have the conversation with ladies going, yeah, there's always a line. Yeah, no, the guys don't have one. In any language around the world. And so here I am standing in line behind these girls, and I asked them, "What were you singing? It was so beautiful." And the girls, they looked at each other and they chuckled at me, because they said that they were singing children's songs. So, like we would have done Row, Row Your Boat or Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, they were singing children's songs, and they thought it was so funny that we enjoyed their music, right. That they were, looking at us being silly, and we thought it was just delightful.
That's
so.
Great. You can go beyond Santiago and walk out to the coast to Finisterre, and these are the markers. This was actually, we took a bus out there during our Portuguese Camino. Once we got to Santiago, and so the one on the left is a hiker stepping down from the rock that kind of overlooks the ocean right there, and that's the 0 kilometer marker.
Because you're at the end of the earth.
End of the earth
so
at the time.
That was their perception of the end of the world.
So then the question becomes, what do you do afterwards? And there are two types of people, I think. There's people that walk the Camino and they do it and it's done and they move on. And then there's people like me who get to the end and they go, we need more, right? And so there's a couple of options for you. And one of them was we had reached out to American Pilgrims on the Camino to get our credential in advance. We went and since joined that organization to get with other Camino addicts around the country. We have currently 60 chapters around the country, and put any two American Pilgrims members in a room and you can talk about the Camino for hours. This was our most recent national gathering. This is out in Lake Tahoe. This was just before the onset of the pandemic. This was about the last event I think that we've been to since then, and this was about 300 people who gathered or actually 250 people who gathered to talk about the Camino and learn a little bit more. This was the band of pilgrims who survived that gathering to the end, because not only did we have the onset of the pandemic, which caused a few people to just come spend a little bit of time and go, but we also had a blizzard come in. And so that nice sunny 60-degree picture you saw turned into 3 feet of snow. And while this was going on, this picture was being taken, we were getting piles and piles of snow outside. In the center back there, just to point out, we get pilgrims at these gatherings from all over the world, is Dan Mullins. He has a well-known Camino podcast in Australia, and he had at the time the #2 album in Australia. He flew on his own dime to come spend time with all these Camino addicts, and he put on a concert the first night. Since we were stuck in the snow, he put on an extra concert the second night, and this was at the conclusion of that. Great group of people. The other thing you can do is you can go on a Camino again, right? You saw the picture at the beginning with all the variety of Caminos. These are some things from our Portuguese Camino, and we chose this time to ride bicycles. And so you'll see on the left, we have bicycles there. We rented them again from Bike Iberia. And these are actually e-bikes because some of the trails go up and down a lot of hills. We're not, that athletic. And so we chose e-bikes. And you'll see the 2 bags on the back. That's all we brought for the entire 2-week journey that we took. So you figure out how to pack much lighter. And we still had stuff we didn't use. This was just a picture of some. This is on the Portuguese way, an old aqueduct. And this is a big iron bridge in Porto. And these are the types of views you get to look forward to on the Portuguese Camino. This was at dinner one night. So what are the lessons, and we took out of this, and we drew these actually from, we had a strategic planning session on the board of directors for American Pilgrims on the Camino, and our facilitator pointed out several lessons. And we said, wow, where did you get those? Those are profound, we were really inspired by them. And she said, they're on your credential. So we were all a little embarrassed, but you forget over time as you're passing these credentials out, every now and again, you got to take a look at these things. And on there was a poem written by a former board member years ago of American Pilgrims, and it hit home. And when we saw these, we sort of reflected on our experience, and these are really the lessons we took away. It's live in the moment, welcome each day its pleasures and challenges, make others feel welcome, share, feel the spirit of those that have gone before you, imagine those that will follow, and appreciate those who walk with you today. That really sums up the Camino experience, I think, in a nutshell. And I took these actually, and I have them written on my board at work, and I work in a building of engineers. Social distancing is our thing. and initially everybody thought that was a little corny. They're like, how does this apply to our work? But we found ourselves periodically coming back to these, and as we think about how we go through our day-to-day work, some of these ring true. So we've used these multiple times in discussion. And that's all I have.
Well, Dave and Amy, thank you so much for letting us explore the Camino de Santiago from our computer screens. No blisters, hopefully, involved with our journey today. The stories of the many pilgrims that you encountered on the Camino, as well as your own experiences over the years, has just really been inspiring. I know the movie, I have seen it, and I would love to do at least part of it at some point in my life. We're grateful that you all joined us today, but we're also grateful that you've joined the Westminster Church family. So we're really excited about that. And I have one person here who says, this was great and thank you. So that's really great. So to the people who are in the audience, if you would like to write down some questions in the Q&A section, that would be great. I'll get started on a couple of questions that I have. We're talking about the movie. I just wanted to know whether you felt that the movie, like how realistic of a portrayal of the actual experience was it, or was it kind of idealized or Hollywoodized, of course, a bit probably.
Sure. I was going to say it's definitely Hollywood. Once you get a Camino group together, people will nitpick that things were out of sequence. Like, oh, no, you don't arrive in this place before you get to that place. But as far as the journey, the creativity of the unique individuals that you meet, I think that's very realistic. The walking into the dinner in the evening early on in the movie, that's a really good representation of kind of how that communal feel occurs. And it's one of those, it is the hardest thing I ever did. Do not get the impression that this was a walk in the park. This was a long, arduous journey. And the running joke is, okay, we walked from the mountains to the sea. How did we spend 790 kilometers walking uphill? But we did. So, and again, it goes back to the idea of learning to live with less. I think the backpacks on the movie are all a little oversized based on what people actually carry as far as what is it that you need. But in general, it represents the different types of environment, the different types of experience as far as the urban piece, the really countryside piece, the aloneness, the togetherness, the finding each other, the getting sick of each other. I think all of those are actually pretty well.
It portrayed
That's
the people,
pretty good.
the types of people you meet pretty well, I think.
Yeah.
It seems from both the movie and from what you've said that people walk the Camino for different reasons, a lot of different reasons.
Yeah.
And some are spiritual in nature, some are not as spiritual in nature. And some it seems that, it seems like there's a real sense of community that you form, even though you're not necessarily walking with the same people every day the whole time, but you meet up again, and that there is this sense of community. It seems
we didn't set out for really religious reasons. We were inspired by the movie, but I will tell you, you do get a chance to go through the cathedrals, go through the little churches, talk to people. At the time, Pope Francis was just beginning his time, and so I read a lot about him. It really, caused a lot of good introspection. It was good.
And also, just before I get to there's a couple of questions coming in, but I also wanted to ask, and I'm going to plug myself in here. I also wanted to ask if you said when you go into a little town to go to the second bar, is that because the first one is too crowded?
Yes, the first one's always crowded. And the second one, there's one table available. So the crowded ones, people will scooch over and let you join, and it's very welcoming.
Yeah.
It works. It just works. And it's one of those that there's a lot of insecurity as you go along in different places. I know our journey that we took, not the Camino Frances, but when we were in France walking, the infrastructure is a little different, and you have to speak with the people in the towns as you arrive to figure out where it is you're supposed to be going. A little different than in Spain, where there's a lot of signage that you can kind of be self-reliant. And learning to kind of let go of your need to be pre-planned. Likes to plan every detail. It's the engineering mindset, and be able to say it's going to be okay, and we'll figure it out, is a really big moment in life. And to take that in 100 million little ways to say it's going to be okay and it will work out, I think even now in our COVID experience that we're kind of going, okay, it's going to be okay. We're going to work it out. It's a piece at a time.
That was particularly evident in France, where you literally had to wander into town and there were no markings, and you had to knock on doors to figure out where do pilgrims stay, and there is a place, but you had to actually interact and.
You don't book ahead of time because you don't know how far exactly you're going to get that day.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
That's great. And to the idea, Amy, of being able to buy the little sundries along the way, I hadn't even thought about that. But the same is true when you go just regular traveling in Europe.
And people need to remember, you are not in the wilderness. It's going to be okay
Right.
for our shops. The shop may not be on the next street corner, but it will be there and you can get something. I know when we got to Burgos, we ended up going into a local version of an REI type store. And I had a delightful button-down blouse that I realized with my backpack straps was not as buttoned as I would like it to be. And so somewhere in a Donativo box in Burgos, that blouse got left behind and a replacement got bought and was worn the rest of the trip. It's okay. You adjust, you work out, and you chuckle a couple of times in the woods when you realize you're showing more than you should, but you saw it. You move on, and it's
That's
okay.
the way it goes.
Yep, that's just the way it goes.
So we have a question here that says, tell us what was in your pack, the light one. And Dave, you were wearing sandals, this person noticed in one of the pictures. And did those work?
Oh yeah, I actually was wearing a pair of shoes that served me really well, a pair of Merrells that I walked most of the way in. But then I got to a point where I wore out a little spot in my shoe and I got a little blister. So I had the ultra fashionable, my son was a little embarrassed, socks with sandals. And that worked well for me. I just used Teva sandals the rest of the walk, and they were fine. Yeah.
And then for me, I would still be on the journey. Teva sandals would not have worked for my feet
really
at all.
Individual.
I was essentially like the hiking tennis shoe. I was the Imelda Martins of shoe buyers before the trip, and that's the biggest thing. Is we walked every day for a year at home before we did this. You
that
don't
training I've heard
decide to go, or if you do decide to up and just go, don't think you're going to walk 30K every day.
So what did you
starting
have in your
one.
pack?
Okay, what did I have in my pack? Essentially, we had the wear an outfit, wash an outfit. So we had two sets of clothes. It was summer, so we knew that they needed to be lightweight. So I had, a pair of shorts that I walked in a t-shirt, and they were all the quick dry, because you wash them out in the sink and hang them up on a bush or hang them on a clothesline. So they needed to dry quickly. I had a pair of like capris that could roll down to be pants if I needed them, and a pair of yoga tights. And so those three things were the bottoms. And then I had the two short sleeve shirts, again, the one being buttons that no longer is here. And then I had a third that was a long sleeve, just a quick dry layer. And then raincoat, rain pants. Did not use the rain pants at all. The raincoat you saw in a couple of pictures. Honestly, it was hot. It was summer. I would have been more sweaty in them, having had to put them all on than to just sweat out.
And she carried every day. She carried the bread arrow, we called it. We bought one of those baguettes, the big long French baguettes.
The fish was that big
long
too.
French baguettes, and she would put it in her pack along the back, and I would just walk up behind her and rip off a bunch.
Because if you have
convenient.
let him carry the fruit, because fruit is actually
fruit
really
is heavier.
heavy.
That's why
heavier. Division
but
of labor there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and then you had a small bag of toiletries, a towel, and Dave's towel was the size of a small bath towel. Mine was a little bit bigger than a kitchen towel because I didn't want to carry the weight, and I figured I could get dry. And it's that, what do you really need versus, what is a luxury? I had sunglasses. Of course, we had a couple of nominal medication things, but the pharmacies in Spain are phenomenal. And again, because you are along the route, they know what's coming. They know what the anticipated problems are going to be. And, so Dave ended up with a rash on the backs of his legs at one point, and, we walked in and pointed, and they gave us a lovely,
they know what those things are.
Lovely, anti-itch medication for that. And, so you're not having to carry, your medicine cabinet. My big green travel bag, stuff stayed home.
Right.
A Ziploc bag had to last 35 days. So you washed it out and used it carefully.
There you go.
So, but it was a very minimalist. So.
Well, this person also asks, sort of related back to the footwear, or maybe not other body parts too, physically, where did you hurt at first? Where did you hurt in the middle? And where did you hurt later in your journey?
Well, we call it affectionately the pilgrim waddle. Because no matter what, after you walk that far each day, and we worked up to it, but still, when you're walking that much day after day, particularly after 3, 4, 5 days, you would get up, you'd sit down and everything would tighten up, and you'd stand up and you'd have to take those first few steps where you're just kind of crouched over. So just a lot of muscle issues. But the thing that really helped us out was we started walking before light, and we would typically end our day around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, wash our clothes, take a shower, take a nap, and then you'd have the evening to go walk around the town. And the albergues generally wants you in with the door closed no later than 9 or 10.
And that was never an issue.
And that was never an issue.
And, even the last 100K, when it was more of the short-term group of people joining us, people still recognized that need to get some sleep. So typically people would sleep. As far as, sleeping bag, blankets, pillows, all of that kind of a thing. No, I had sleep sheet that was sewn, kind of looked like a sleeping bag, but it was just a sheet. And then I had my one perk was my lovely little teeny tiny down travel pillow. Yeah. And that was one of those, that was I'm willing to, put the weight on that. Other people would just fold up their long sleeve shirt and sleep on that. It was personal preference. So,
good.
But yeah, mine was feet. Everything was feet. But, you just get used to it.
Get used to it. Well, the next question is more of a spiritual nature. This person says that the placing of the one's rock on to tip the balance is a Roman Catholic concept. Rather than, and I don't know, he says that it's not actually in the gospel, but from the Roman Catholic Church. And I am not that familiar with this, but he wanted to know what your take on this aspect of the Camino as a part of the whole spiritual side of the experience. And
we've seen it in the movie, and so we knew sort of the concept or the why it was done. And I'll tell you, it wasn't. I didn't think it was that important. We did it because we saw it in the movie. We thought it was interesting to bring something from Guam to Spain. But in the end, it's again looking back, and when you're doing it, when you're there, it sort of takes on some meaning, right? Because it forces you to think about it. And well, what am I unburdening? Sort of what have I learned from this whole experience that's going to make me different later? And so I would say it took on some meaning at the time.
Well, and also going back to who are you having your journey with that day? We had a priest from Nigeria who had an entire collection of rocks that he had brought from all different people at home, that he was carrying the rock for them as part of his journey. And, I looked at it and went the number of, I was counting pounds in my head trying to figure out how much he had carried, he was
carrying about 30 pounds of rocks.
He had all of this as his, that was part of what and why he was on the Camino that day. So you would sometimes run across people that you would spend 2 minutes with and it would make a huge impression. There were other people that you would interact with multiple days, just because your pacing was similar. So you just never knew who the moment was going to be. But we saw him that one time. We saw him only for a few minutes, and it really made an impression. Yeah. So,
So the short one-day pilgrimage that I did on Iona, there is a place where you take a rock and throw it into the ocean, and it is the concept not of tipping a balance in the Judgment Day, but of unburdening oneself from something. And then we were asked to then take another rock to be something that we wanted to add to our lives that was positive. And I use that in labyrinth walks too, when I do those as pilgrimages. So anyway, that was interesting. I have another person who has said, it's so nice to see the two of you, and thank you so much for this presentation, but before we go, I did want to ask a couple more questions. Did you prefer walking or biking?
I actually preferred walking because when I was biking, I was much more focused on the physical action of keep the bike upright, keep on the bike, cobblestone. So there was much more of my mental focus was on that action as compared to when I was walking. That's kind of motor memory. I really don't have to think about it as much. It allowed my mind more time to just think and be kind of in my head. We covered every topic, the two of us walking together, but we also had that, one-on-one time where we were either separate or even just walking side by side with our thoughts. So when I was walking, that was much more forefront as far as my ability to have time to think.
Yeah, I liked, I enjoyed the biking, but I like the walking better because it forces you to slow down more. You have more personal interactions with people. Whereas on the bike, I found that we didn't interact with as many people because you'd talk to them in the evening. They would continue walking the next day and you would bike on and
you'd be zooming past. Yeah. So
Buen Camino is your zooming
right, Buen Camino. Yeah. So both for that sense of community and just your own contemplative time of reflection.
Exactly.
If anyone else who has any more questions, please feel free to write them. I wanted to know if, well, you've gone several times now, but what was the experience, what you had hoped for, like for the first time you went? Was it kind of what you expected? And I know you had gone primarily in the beginning because of the film, but what was there?
I tell you, it was more than I expected. I mean, I couldn't ask for any better. We actually got pretty lucky when we went into the cathedral. We jumped in right at the last minute. They have a noon pilgrims mass, and we stepped in right at 11:59. And we were at the sort of the close to the altar, and they have this botafumero that they swing in the cathedral that goes and arc through the cathedral, and they did swing it that day.
It doesn't always swing. It
doesn't always swing, and they went right up over our heads, and that was one of the sort of iconic things that we had seen, and it's something to see in person, and so. Yeah.
And honestly, I wasn't convinced even as I stepped out that I was going to make it. The running joke in the family is the kids had a bet board of when was mom going to cry and when was mom going to quit. And apparently I did neither. So they all lost on that one. But the hesitation, the confidence in is this going to all work? Our second trip when we were in France, we ended at our start point in Saint Jean. And the interesting thing is, it was back to the same town that I had been in just a couple of years before. And it was a completely different experience because the first time when I was in Saint Jean, it was the nerves, the anticipation that what am I doing? What have I gotten myself into? Am I going to do this? Am I going to be the biggest failure on the whole trip? What's going to, and so my mind was worrying. Whereas the second time it was the end point. And it was the calm, it was the contemplation of we did it, and isn't this amazing? And then you start looking around and you go, this town is adorable, and then you see what all is there, and it was the same place, completely different experience the second time.
Yeah. So that's interesting because I was going to ask about which of the different paths you preferred, but you had such a different experience on each of them, and having one being your first was really different than one being on bike and then one being a place coming back to where you had been.
Yeah, I thought about if we did it again. I'm almost hesitant to do the same pathway twice because it's going to be different. It's different every time. And the first one was so memorable for me.
So special, yeah.
Yeah, that I just want to leave that alone as an experience and try these other paths.
Yeah, I can understand that. And this person with the next question sounds like how much, it sounds like she may be wanting to do it herself. How much should I walk every day to get ready?
We walked, it wasn't so much distances every day. It was just walking some every day, and we tried some hills. We lived in Guam at the time, so there's plenty of hiking you can do around there. And we worked on, after we got some time down walking on sort of flat surfaces, we made sure we paid some attention to hills because, like Ames said, we always say the Camino was always up. The hills are
Uphill both
important.
ways, right?
Yeah, the hills are important. So we spent some time there, but it wasn't so much distances as it was just keeping it up day after day.
Right. It's the repetitive aspect, because you can do anything for a day. You know, you can go off and all these crazy experiences. And that's what Ryan really, that kind of was the end point for him, is because he wasn't accustomed to that day after day after day of the, you know, kind of the abuse of the body.
Yeah, very long days.
You're pushing something. I mean, we are in a very sedative society. We sit all the time, and to say I'm going to get up and go every single day, that's the biggest challenge. So that would be my.
And the other thing, I guess, the piece of advice I would give would be, you don't have to sprint. You don't have to get a certain distance every day. The journey is more important than the destination in this particular case. And so I will tell you, on our Portuguese Camino, we bicycled, and we slowed down a little bit, and we took the actual trail instead of using the roadways, because the roadways would have been easier with the bike. We had the e-bikes, so we followed the actual trail, which took some additional time, and we got to Camina, which is right on the border of Spain and Portugal, and we were out of time at that point. We had so much fun on our way up that we said, you know, we'll turn in the bikes here, and we actually hopped a bus, and we took the bus up to Santiago, spent a day or so there, and then went over to Finisterre and back. And because had it been our first time, we would have plowed through and done the whole thing. But the second time, we're like, you know, this was just incredible, and we're out of time, so we're done, and we'll move on.
Yeah, the journey as much as the destination. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Well, the last one simply says, thanks so much. It's really inspirational. That's a good question to end on, that it was very inspirational. I wanted to close with a quick prayer, again, from the Iona pilgrimage. So let us pray. May God be a bright flame before you, be a guiding star above you, be a smooth path below you, be a kindly shepherd behind you, today, tomorrow, and forever. Amen.
Amen.
So thank you, Amy and Dave, for sharing with us today. And thanks to all those who attended today. Please watch the Westminster eGram for upcoming webinars on a whole variety of different kinds of topics in our Broadening Horizons. It sometimes can be travel. It can sometimes just be learning something new, the whole Broadening Horizons concept. And join us again to make new discoveries and learn about our world. And blessings for all of us on our journey together. Thank you so much for coming.
Very much.
Okay, thanks.